Welcome to Americana Archives. Today's headline is Italy in America, a day in the camp of an Italian gravel gang. The subheadline says, How the men eat, drink, and enjoy themselves. Shrewd financiering necessary to make both ends meet. Hard work and small pay. This article came from a special letter. It says, When settled weather begins in the spring, the Italian portions of Chicago become suddenly deserted by most of the men, and the dusky women and children are left to come and go at their own pleasure, carrying their bundles of rags and sticks upon their heads. Only an occasional old man, too feeble to longer fear the burden in the heat of the day, and those who have become established in some line of the mendicant profession, which keeps them in the city throughout the year, remain to keep the chattering women and children company. The fathers and husbands of these humble women reverse the order of high society. Instead of sending their families into the country to spend the hot months, they go themselves, but on a very different sort of pleasuring than that in which the usual urbanite indulges on his or her summer rusticating. To be sure, these small sons of Rome go to camp out, and camp in a very large way too. But instead of pitching tent under the cool shade of the northern woods, beside tempting trout streams or lakes teeming with pickerel, the Italians, as the country people among whom they go invariably come to call them, usually camp on the bare exposure of some sun-beamed field, alongside the heated rails of a sidetrack. In the place of guns, fishing rods, and tackle, they are armed with skillets, tin pails, shovels, and picks. A single long, close shed comparatively innocent of windows, and honeycombed with rough and narrow bunks, accommodates seldom less than 100 of these immigrants from the city, and forms a striking contrast to the picturesque canvas tents or the cheerful verandas and spacious rooms of summer hotels, with which we are accustomed to associate the exile from city cares and smells during the heated term. The canoe in which the Italian laborer takes his daily exercise during his sojourn in the country is a flat car, and the sylvan retreat where he finds sure game is the sweltering basin of a gravel pit. If this earth affords a hotter place under the scorching beams of an August sun than the glittering bed of a gravel pit where even a fair breeze cannot be felt and the stones and gravel reflect and intensify the heat, then neither the Italian nor your correspondent has found it. But these knights of the shovel and pick did not seem to realize the intense heat as they jabbered in musical tones and heaped the flat cars with clean gravel in the big pit at Geneva, Illinois, or leaned on their shovels, waiting for a loaded train to pull out and an empty to back in. They were as jolly as a crowd of picnickers and far more polite than as many excursionists. The superintendent of the pit is a brawny, good-natured American who gave his orders through his Italian interpreter in a prompt, decided way, which commanded instant obedience from the shovelers. The interpreter is usually the assistant superintendent or boss of the pit, and is a very important man, both in times of peace and war. The latter occasions are, fortunately, not very frequent, and are generally the result of feuds between the opposing cliques, into which large bodies of men seem to inevitably crystallize when thrown into the constant intimacy of camp life. Inquiry among the villagers who live nearest the camp developed the universal verdict that the laborers are honest, orderly, and quiet, and give no trouble or annoyance. Although the entire cooking of the camp is done with fuel which the laborers glean from the fields and along the railroad tracks, they are careful not to glean anything but discarded fuel. But every dead limb or waste bit of lumber in the vicinity of the camp is jealously foraged. On Sunday, the camp presents a most lively and striking picture. It is Universal Wash Day. In fact, every chore of a domestic kind that can be postponed during the week is left to be done on the Sabbath. From daylight till dark, the nearest brook or pond is alive with these dark-skinned, soft-voiced sons of ancient Rome, who jabber a babble of liquid talk, mingled with the merriest of laughter, as they wash themselves in their clothing. The heavy rains of this season have filled the ditches with running streams. The water is not as clear as Waukesha, but it is very handy to the camp. These streams also possess another advantage, which seems to be thoroughly appreciated by the Italians. Although the banks of the ditches are rather steep, they are near enough together to allow a man with ordinarily long legs to straddle the stream, bend his head down between his legs as though about to stand on his head, and wash his face in the water below him. It is a ludicrous sight to look up one of these ditches, bridged by a dozen pairs of legs and overhung by as many dripping, spluttering heads, which the slightest push would precipitate into the muddy current beneath. The fences, bushes, and grass about the camp are decorated during the Sabbath with the washed and drying clothes of 200 laborers. A good story is told of a farmer's wife who was driving early Monday morning along the wagon road, which at one point commands a view of the quarters. "Goodness gracious, John," exclaimed the astonished woman as she viewed the drying clothes which covered the fences and grass for many rods. "What an awful big family them folks must have. No wonder they can't afford windows on the side of their house. I'll warrant there ain't no boys in that family, for if they was, they wouldn't be such awful washings in the first place. And then they never could have got it out so early in the morning if they hadn't been all girls so to help about it." Evenings and Sunday afternoons, the men sit about in the rough-sod kitchens which surround the main building, or stretched on the grass, smoke their pipes, mend their clothes, and tell stories of the sunny land which they have left behind them. Another domestic duty which requires much of their time is the preparation of macaroni. The dough for this is given an amount of kneading which would discourage an American housewife if she were required to mold her bread to the same extent. Only the more shiftless members of the camp can find any time for idleness or leisure as long as daylight lasts. But when the dusk comes, care and fatigue seem to slip readily from all, and singing and organ and bagpipe playing put them in as great spirits as though they had money in the bank, instead of being obliged to shovel gravel at $1.25 for 10 hours. Sometimes when the demand for this class of labor is strong and the supplies scarce, they get $1.50, but more frequently the former. Some of the men, however, do not make as poor a net showing upon this income as might be expected. There have been many instances in which they have been known to live on a total expense of 20 cents a day. This is not merely economy, it is financiering. A favorite article of diet is watermelons. As soon as these can be had at a reasonable price, the streets leading from the village store to the camp are filled with little squads of these foreign laborers, each man bearing on his shoulder a head a carefully poised watermelon. Bread is their staple food, for they cannot afford meat. Great quantities of stale Vienna twists are frequently dead-headed out from the city. On such occasions, a delegation is always in waiting at the station to receive the long loaves, which are wrapped with burlap into huge bundles and carried, like the melons, on the heads and shoulders of the men to camp. It needs only a single incident from this camp to refute the faultless sentiment which is sometimes voiced to the effect that this class of laborers are a little better in intelligence and appreciation than his many cattle. By his fair and considerate treatment of the laborers, the railway official directly in authority over the Geneva camp unconsciously endeared himself to the men. And when the season was over, the Italians chose a delegation from among their number to go to the official's home and present him with a quantity of rare old wine of choice Italian vintage. This article was written by Forrest Chrissy. This story came from the great state of Illinois, being reported in the Illinois Weekly Courier of September 14th, 1892. Thank you for joining us today. If you want to continue to uncover all of America's lost and forgotten history, then remember before you leave to hit the subscribe button, hit the notification bell, and remember to like and comment below. And we will see you next time on Americana Archives.